is, I think, a remarkable event that, I keep having to swivel my head back and forth to get to all sides. A remarkable event that all of these different groups are coming together, and in some ways it's the title and the theme of my talk. It's the new world in which all of us are focused on analytics. And I even, I made a new talk. I was talking with, I was in a little conference with Ann Robinson at Cisco, who I think is here. I'll mention her later as well. And we were presenting in Palo Alto about a week ago. And after my talk, she said, "Oh, your talks are remarkably consistent," which didn't sound like a compliment. So I thought, maybe I should make a new one. But I broke out my old Tinker Toy theme, graphic theme, because I think, we really are becoming much more of a community of analytical people. And as I say, that's the theme. So I call it the new quantitative era, which is a little cheeky, I think, because quantitative analytics are hardly new. The first reference that I have found to corporate quantitative analytics, in the United States at least, was from the CEO of UPS in 1954. And he said, well, if we didn't have operations research, we'd have to make all of our decisions intuitively, and they probably wouldn't be nearly as good. So I like this quote in part because it shows this goes way back. Also, I was born in 1954. I'm sure you're all shocked. You thought Jim Stern was the oldest one here, but no, I'm oldest by a year or so. So it's been around for a while, but I think we can say that enough things are happening so that it really is a new world, and I hope to persuade you of that. So I'll talk about how we manage all of this at an enterprise level, this new world, how we relate it to decisions in this new environment and new ways of thinking about decision making, because after all, that is the purpose of all of the stuff that we're up to. New methods, new relationships, new skills, new architectures, and new cultures. So I hope that by the end of my talk, you'll agree that there's enough new stuff going on that it really does represent a bit of a new world. I think one of the most interesting things is the confluence of groups. I mean, in this organization, you've got the conversion people and the web analytics people and the predictive analytics people. I spoke at Jim's invitation to the eMetrics conference, 2 years ago? And then I kind of felt like an emissary to a foreign land in a way. Here's the business analytics guy coming in to talk to the web analytics people, and it felt like I was representing a different country. Now it feels like we're kind of all getting together. We're sort of the analytical equivalent of the European community, at least, if not the United States. And some of the groups are quite diverse that are getting together. You know about the ones represented here, but a lot of interest now in HR analytics and a burgeoning group in that area. If you saw the New York Times on Sunday in the business section, there was this article which kind of annoyed me a little bit. I had done an article on the topic of talent analytics with a couple of other people in Harvard Business Review at the end of last year, and Google was our poster child. Google was doing some fantastic things in HR analytics, and they teased us. They said, well, we also did this great work called Project Oxygen that tried to figure out what were the 8 traits of outstanding managers at Google, which they analyzed in a very rigorous and quantitative fashion. And I think then they said 4. Later on it became 3. The 3 traits of screwed up managers at Google. And I said, wow, that's great. What are they? Sorry, we're not telling. Incredibly frustrating. But I guess they decided that the New York Times was a better source than I to report this, because in that article, a lot of detail about these 8 traits and how they came at them, and the 3 bad ones as well. So a lot of action going on in that regard. Even actuarial analytics. Now, I don't know if you know about actuarial analytics. These are the people who basically spend their lives computing when we're going to die. It's a true story. There's a whole profession called actuaries. I used to like to say that actuaries are like accountants, but without the personality. But they too have decided that they want to enter this broader world of analytics. They know a lot about statistics, it turns out. There's a woman at Humana named Lisa Tourville who is kind of the outreach person. She gives a lie to the stereotype. She's got big red hair and is a great softball player and has a huge personality. Anyway, they want to enter the whole area of, broader area of analytics. Certainly a lot in marketing. It's kind of interesting if you walk through the booth area with all the vendors and so on. You see various groups represented. One, the International Institute for Analytics, I am representing today. You also see Informs there, the Institute for Operations Research and the Management Sciences. Ann Robinson, who I mentioned earlier from Cisco, is the head of outreach for that organization, and they are, historically these very geeky supply chain, OR, decision modeling people, but lots and lots of members, like 15,000 members, and they've decided, yeah, the whole world of business analytics is our territory too, and they're talking to the American Statistical Association. So everybody's kind of getting into this game. You walk around the booth and you see it in other areas. Every major consulting firm now, Deloitte, I think, is the world's largest consulting firm. They're into analytics in a big way now. You have offshore groups represented. Mu Sigma, which calls itself the world's largest applied math factory, with over 1,000 people in Bangalore and in North America doing analytics work. So the world is really changing quite dramatically in this regard, both within the organizations and in the broader ecosystem. And I think we all have to figure out, so, how do I play in this area? The only approach that's probably not going to work out very well, if you were a web analytics person or conversion person or a predictive analytics person or an actuary, and you only like kind of staying in your little corner and doing your kind of models and never changing, I got bad news for you, because your world is going to be rocked over the next several years. Of course, as I said, the whole purpose of all of this is making better decisions. It's behind every aspect of analytics. It's behind data warehouses. It's behind big enterprise systems and so on. So we have to constantly be thinking about how is what I'm doing related to this activity of making better decisions. Now after doing a lot of work on analytics, I decided, okay, I'm going to help organizations re-engineer their decision processes. So I wrote an article in 2009 about this in Harvard Business Review called Make Better Decisions. And I just sat back and waited for my phone to start ringing. Come in, Tom, and help us make better decisions. Awfully quiet it was by my telephone. Nobody was interested at all in doing that. I decided that we have to approach this issue a little more subtly. Most organizations are not going to systematically re-engineer their decision processes with analytics or anything else, but I think we can surreptitiously start to inject that orientation as we work in our organizations, and we can say, okay, first critical step is what decision should we be focusing on? You identify some of those and say, okay, let's make them better. I'll talk about some ways that people people do that in a second. Analytics are the most common one. Once you make it better, I don't know about you, but I make mistakes. Most humans make mistakes. And it turns out that if you admit your mistakes and you review them systematically, you tend to make better decisions over time. And then this whole process of improving decisions can be institutionalized. So I'm going to give you a few quick examples of all of that. I was interested enough in this, so I looked at 57 different decisions in a study that I did a couple of years ago. 57 decisions that had been improved by the organization that performed this decision. Most of them, pretty repetitive decisions, like, which customers to go after or where to site facilities, what price to charge, etc. So I asked, what did you do to improve that decision if you improved it? And I had a bunch of check boxes as I would go through the interviews. And at the end, just to make sure, I'd say, now, you sure you didn't do this, this, or this? Nope, just the ones I mentioned. Okay, so then I added it all up. You're going to talk about analytics, you need a little data. Here's my data. The number one most common intervention into making decisions better was analytics. Great. About 84% said, yeah, we used analytics to improve our decision. Probably slightly an artifact of the sample. I know a lot of analytics-oriented companies, so wasn't random. But then, the next in the list was changes in culture and leadership to improve our decision. Next was better data. Fourth was change in the business process in which the decision was employed. Fifth was education of the people at the front line doing the decision, and so on. So you see this kind of alternation between the analytics, data, sort of left brain world and the culture, leadership, education, process, sort of right brain world. What that says, if it's your job, and I would submit that it is, to make decisions better within your organization, you better not just bring analytics to the table. You better have an answer for how do we improve culture and leadership? And what kind of education do we need? And how do we change the business process involved here? And how about those overrides? Should we allow people to override the analytics? That was in the list as well. Anyway, I think if you want this paper that talks about this more, it's on the SAS website, sas.com/decisions. You can download it. Average number of decisions, average number of interventions per decision, 5.3. So you do a lot of things to make a decision better. Quick example, Stanley Works, been in business for a couple of hundred years, making hammers and rakes and so on in New Britain, Connecticut. They decided that one of their most important decisions was pricing. I submit, you want to make a lot of money with analytics, pricing is almost always a good strategic target. So they set up a pricing center of excellence, hired a smart Babson MBA to head it, and started making interventions. Look at this list, it's a long list. New pricing methodologies, new pricing optimization software, gross margin calls. I call those harassment calls. What's your gross margin this week over in the tool division? What's your gross margin over here in the gardening division? Senior executives on the line, often the CEO on the line. I met the CEO, he says that was maybe the single most effective tool. It provided motivation for all of the other things. An offshore group to gather competitive prices, automated pricing in some cases using decision rules for promotions, and the Center of Excellence spread these innovations in a kind of a knowledge management sense. What's the outcome? How do you like 6% improvement in gross margin? CEO said, had we not done that, it would likely be Black & Decker Stanley today rather than Stanley Black & Decker. The money that we made through pricing optimization and all these different approaches gave us the wherewithal to buy a significant company and combine with them. Finally, or semi-finally, you need to review these things. This is basically my excuse to put Tom Brady on the screen. We should have been in the Super Bowl this year. Since there's probably not going to be any football this year, I figured I'd at least put up a professional football picture for you. Tom Brady is notable for many things. Analytically, the Patriots are very analytical. He was a great choice, 200th that year in the draft. Nobody else wanted him. Patriots said, great, we can get him for low money. He's not paid low money now. He is the best paid quarterback in football. Married to a supermodel. You too can be a billionaire and married to a supermodel if you become a student of error, because that's what Tom Brady is. Tom Brady makes mistakes. He doesn't make very many of them. He threw fewer interceptions this year than any quarterback in the history of football. But every time he makes a mistake, he goes over it and over it and over it and says, where did I go wrong? He's the first one in to watch the game films every Monday morning or right after the game. He's the last one to leave. They get a great parking spot if they win the hardest worker award, and Tom Brady's Audi R8 is always in it. So we are all makers of error. The only way we're going to get better at decision making is to become students of error. The Army learned this in the After Action Review. They started it after they screwed up so much in Vietnam, and they've been doing it ever since. This medical center in Washington is just one example. There are a number of others. University of Michigan, where Tom Brady went to school, also did this in the medical school. You start admitting you make errors, and you focus on addressing them and tell your customers about them. Voila, things start to get better, and your customers like you better as a result, it seems, in these medical center applications anyway. How do you institutionalize this? Chevron is a great example over across the bay here. Chevron, a few years ago, tried to expand a big refinery in Richmond across the bay, and they brought in a decision analysis group, and they said, this is nuts. Everybody's going to hate us if we do this. It's not going to be economically a good decision. They went through a detailed analysis and proved bad decision. So they decided not to do it. And that led them down a path where before every major decision, for them a major decision is one costing over $100 million. Your criteria may be a little lower than that. But before every major decision, they have to have a systematic decision analysis using economic and other data. They trained tons of people in this, over 2,500 decision makers, including the CEO. Effectively, if you want to be a senior executive at Chevron, you have to go through this decision analysis approach. So I talked to the guy who's the head of the decision analysis group, and I said, how did you pull this off? Oh, one other key thing. After every major decision, a formal look back later on. How did it work out? I said, how'd you pull this off? And he said, we have a culture of honesty and self-examination. That's pretty important, I think, to all of this, right? I'll say more about culture later on. But these are organizations that have focused on decisions, that have embedded it into the day-to-day fabric of the organization, and have made analytics a very key part of how they operate. Okay, methods. I talk about the old method for analytics where we kind of get the requirements, learn something about the decision to be made, start gathering data and coding. We come back maybe 9 months later with a proposed solution, 6 months if you're really energetic. Find out it's not really what the decision maker had in mind, start all over again. It's a very kind of craft-oriented process. More and more, when I talk to these organizations about how they improve decisions, a number of them said, we're starting to use this more agile approach. Some people call it Scrum, some people call it Agile, but it's not just Agile system development, it's Agile decision support, where we have a set of user-driven deliverables delivered frequently, frequent check-ins, a lot of involvement of the stakeholders and so on. So I mentioned Ann Robinson before. She led a group at Cisco who did this with forecasting. Now, forecasting is pretty important at Cisco. You may recall about a decade ago, Cisco had a $2.25 billion write-off for excess inventory. The dot-com economy collapsed. Cisco was stuck with a lot of finished inventory and components and couldn't sell them. Over the past decade or so, Cisco's focused a lot on forecasting, and Ann's group was focused particularly on how do we bring statistical forecasting into the mix. So you see this kind of winding path with various steps along the way. What tool should we use? Okay, once we pick that better forecast accuracy, how do we tune the model? How do we scale the model? How do we automate the model? Have formal sign-off on it, test it, and then go live. About a 20-month process. And said, but a lot of different deliverables along the way, a lot of opportunities for stakeholders to say, yeah, that's kind of what I had in mind, or no, that's not what it was at all, you need to do something different. So I think we should all, whether you formalize it or just do it individually yourself, think of Agile methods as the way to go for providing analytics to decision making.